And we're back. It is the second week. Welcome back into the Fantasy Football Forum. I am joined once again by my co host Grant, coming from the West Coast, the very sunny West Coast, I should say. Is it sunny out there where you're at, Grant, this week?
It actually is. Yeah, it's about 7:50, and yeah, the sun's still out, and yeah, it's a good time.
Good time. Where I'm at in the country, it is very hot. So we are trying to make do with staying inside as much as possible outside the heat. But we won't dive into that. We're not here for this. Is not weather talk tonight on a Friday night. We are once again talking football, fantasy football, and all things off season. Because what do people that have nothing better to do with on a Friday night than to just discuss fantasy football and all the latest and greatest from the off season, the NFL, and this week, if you missed our show last week, we talked the AFC North. So if you go back to on our YouTube channel, like, subscribe when we upload videos, you get notified when we upload. Leave a comment if you have one, good, bad. If it's bad, go ahead, just move on. Then we don't care. But if it's good, go leave that. But this week we're doing the NFC North. So Grant, as we look at NFC North, what are kind of your initial thoughts when you look at this division?
Mm. So this division, I think, unlike the AFC North that we talked about last week, for the first time in a long time, I think this division is really anybody's. It's anybody's division, honestly.
Mm.
You have an up and coming team in Detroit that has shown success. You have a team like Minnesota that had a lot of close wins last year, but historically that doesn't pan out long term, and you saw cracks of that when you got later in the season and in the playoffs. Then you have Chicago, who has a typical young quarterback, and then Green Bay, who has an untested quarterback altogether. So I think my first initial thoughts of this division is it is anybody's ball game. It's going to be nitty. It's going to be gritty. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of good fantasy.
I like that. Yeah. This, to your point, this is the first time in, I think, about 30 years where the Packers have not either had a quarterback by the name of Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers.
Mm.
So this is, I mean, we are living in unprecedented times. And I say that. And the reason I can say that with much confidence is the Detroit Lions this year are favored to win the NFC North. And I don't know about you, but the Detroit Lions have not been favored to win a whole lot in most of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I do
Mm-hmm.
remember when they did have Barry Sanders playing for them, and they still were not favored to win a whole lot back then. So this is definitely unprecedented times we live in.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a division that has like last 10, 15 years been Green Bay, sprinkle in some years of Chicago having up and down, or maybe Minnesota. But yeah,
Mm,
traditionally it's been Green Bay's division, and now I think, like you mentioned before, this is the first time in a long time that anybody can win this division, and I think you're going to see a lot of great divisional matchups that are going to, for fantasy, people watching for fantasy purposes, going to result in lots of points for your team.
yep, absolutely. If we look at what is the potential realistic how this division could play out. Obviously, like I mentioned, Detroit
Mm-hmm.
is leading the way as they are the favorite to win the division. Minnesota is still kind of that to take second in the division, with then Chicago being behind them and Green Bay to finish last. That's kind of how we typically hear about this division being talked about. I would say if we're going to take a bold call stance on this, and real quick, before speaking of bold calls, I am going to say last year, I have receipts on this. So if you want to go look it up, it was last August. I put out a video, and my 2022 bold calls, I said the Detroit Lions were going to go to the playoffs last year. Now, I was wrong, technically, because they did not go to the playoffs. I was right in being in on the Detroit Lions. So it's still a win in my book, where yes, I did not win they would go to the playoffs, but I was a year early on seeing the success for the Detroit Lions. So if you're hearing me kind of damper a little bit on the Detroit Lions, understand I was in it first before it was cool. And so now I'm trying to be a little more realistic on it. And I'm not trying to just follow the crowd here. So just more, I'm going to get that straight. And I do have receipts for it because, as we all know, this isn't, me telling Grant or anybody else while drinking beers or whatever we want, hey, this is what I think. I put this out there, so go find it. It's there. Anyway, if we're taking bold calls, I'm going to say for my bold call on this division that I think Chicago makes the surprise jump that Detroit did last year. And Justin Fields, and we'll get kind of more in depth from each team, but Justin Fields kind of makes that second year leap with his passing that we're kind of hoping he does from a real football but fantasy style play. And that Chicago is the one that ends up grabbing this division, surprisingly, that Detroit actually finishes behind them, with Minnesota faltering a bit more than what we think. And then Green Bay still finishing last, although I could see Green Bay surprising a lot of people, and I'm going to put myself on notice on that as well, that I think Green Bay still, they have a great defense, and, we'll get to them a lot more, but yeah, that's kind of my bull call for this league. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
No, I think you're spot on. Like I think with the bold calls, I could see Justin Fields kind of taking that Jalen Hurts type of leap that we saw, where he becomes more of a unproven quarterback who could make errors in the moment, to all of a sudden having confidence, stepping up in the pocket, making the right reads, which we saw from Jalen Hurts. And if you were a fantasy owner who got Jalen Hurts last year, either in Dynasty or in just like a single league, you obviously did well for yourself because you probably got him for a great value in a later round. So I think a lot of people are expecting or hoping the same thing with Fields, is, we see some of that similar jump. So I do like that. I do think if Fields progresses well and he plays better, I do think Chicago has a very, very good chance of winning the division, competing with Detroit. I also kind of agree with the last two teams, Minnesota and Green Bay. I mean, I don't really see either of them seriously competing for the division unless something crazy happens with injuries or other factors with Detroit or Chicago. But I do like the idea of Fields. I really hope he takes that next step and starts just dropping dimes, and his offensive line gives him some protection, and he's able to kind of find a rhythm and become a hopefully like a 25-30 point fantasy starter. Last year, as everyone knows, like he was so up and down. Like there were some weeks where it was, I mean, it was a journey. Let's just say it was a roller coaster. If you had Justin Fields on your team, you were it was almost like a flex quarterback. Basically, there's a lot of up and downs.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen quarterbacks with his rushing ability specifically, do well. Lamar Jackson has gotten better as a passer. Jalen Hurts was jokingly seen as a running back that just happened to also play quarterback, and we all have seen his progression as well. So there's obviously hope. I mean, this is a great transition, since we'll start with the last place team of the division last year, which happens to be the Chicago Bears. So literally our bold call is to make the Chicago Bears go from worst to first in their division. So we'll see what happens on that. Notable free agency losses this year for fantasy wise. They only had one, where they lost running back David Montgomery. And we'll talk about him with another team this year. But the big news for them is who they added onto the team this year. So they added wide receiver DJ Moore. They added running back Donta Foreman and tight end Robert Tonyan from the Packers. So DJ Moore, obviously, we all know he was part of the trade that was with the first overall pick that was sent to Carolina, and they got DJ Moore plus a treasure trove of picks as well. Very savvy move, I would say, by the front office here of Chicago. In the draft, though, the biggest highlight I would say would be the 4th-round running back, Roshan Johnson, that they added. So not only did they add running back depth in free agency, they also then drafted running back depth. And as I kind of look at this team, how they're building it is this is a team that's saying, we want to put the weapons around Fields to see if he actually is the quarterback that we drafted. Now, this is not the same front office, is not the same coaching staff that drafted Fields back when he was drafted, but they're saying we see what he has, and we're going to put playmakers around him. So now we're going to see if he really is who we think he is. So giving him an upgrade wide receiver, DJ Moore. They still have Chase Claypool from the trade with Pittsburgh last year. So that puts DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Chase Claypool as the 3 wide receivers that would be out there. With adding Robert Tonyan to the tight end room with Cole Kmet, and then having a 3-headed backfield really with Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson, and Donta Foreman. So thoughts on, we just talked about wanting to see Fields take that leap. Does adding these pieces help Fields make that leap, or are they going to still come up short this year?
Good question. I think from a real football perspective, this is the smart thing to do if you're the front office, because you have yet to commit serious dollars to a quarterback. And as we have seen with, with Mahomes, with Allen, most recently with Lamar Jackson, and coming up soon next year with Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow, there's going to be serious money invested in quarterbacks. So I think I like this move by the Bears front office of understanding, well, let's put pieces around him so we know his potential, what he can work with, see what he can do. Fantasy wise, I like this a lot because we saw last year when Fields had less weapons what he could do, and obviously him being a rookie, still figuring things out. He made rookie mistakes that a lot of quarterbacks do. I mean, it's a learning process. It's different gain, different speed than college. Even at Ohio State where he was from. So I like this from fantasy. I think this helps him. I think this helps his value. I personally think he is like there's the upper tier quarterbacks, and I think like there's like top 3 or 4. I think he's right there at that bottom, like maybe the 4th, 5th quarterback because of his running ability. Also, too, he's younger, and these weapons definitely help, in my opinion. In terms of Chicago, like real football, them like doing well, it's still undetermined, right? But I think that there's gonna be lots of especially with the running backs. These guys, Deontay Foreman and both Rashawn Johnson, both were from Texas. Deontay Foreman's a couple of years older, of course, but I feel like there's, like all 3 of those guys are studs. And so I think that's going to help relieve some pressure off of Fields. So I think this is good for Fields. And I'm hoping that we see him, like, I can see him being QB 5 plus, like, or better at the end of the year.
Right. So currently ADP, now our ADP that we use is single quarterback, 12-team PPR scoring format. So those that are wondering what that looks like, that's where we're taking it from. And again, this is taken a snapshot in time. This is June 30th. So if you're listening to this and it's, a month later, this may change. But as of right now, Justin Fields is kind of going in a group in the 5th round. He's on the middle of the 5th round. Going around him, though, around between the 5th and 6th rounds. Here are the quarterbacks being taken there. So would you take Fields or one of the other quarterbacks? We have Justin Herbert going at the 5-1. Justin Fields is going at the 5-5. Or Trevor Lawrence goes at the 6-3. So would you take Fields? Would you potentially go Herbert before him, or wait and just grab Lawrence on the way back if you're in the 6th round?
Man, that's a good question. I think both those quarterbacks. I am not high on Lawrence. We can talk more about Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, we can break him
down
at a different. When we do that division, we'll break him down.
And but I do think Justin Herbert and Justin Fields, both great quarterbacks. I'm thinking I'm probably a little higher on Herbert than Fields at the moment, just because I mean Herbert got some weapons. He also got a new offensive coordinator that is not afraid to throw it downfield.
Right.
So for fantasy wise a little higher on Herbert. I think, man, but Fields is not a bad pick, honestly. I mean, if you're in the fifth round and Fields falls to you, you have to be happy with that because you get value in his passing game and his rush game
Yep.
too. I mean, he threw up some great numbers last year. So I think if you're in the fifth round and you get either of those quarterbacks, I'm happy with those personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where the biggest risk for Fields I see, last year, and again, we have to be careful just saying, well, last year's stats only did this, but it kind of gives us maybe what's the floor, what to expect. And last year, I think Fields only threw for over 200 yards, like 2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
times. I don't have his specific stats right in front of me, but from
Mm-hmm.
memory, I think that's what it was. So that's kind of the scary floor. Are we just going to see the rushing side? But that goes back to our
Mm-hmm.
earlier comments of does he take that step forward as a thrower? He has now.
Mm-hmm.
We've just seen the weapons around him, adding DJ Moore, who led the league while he was in Carolina last year in air yards. So he's an air yard monster, and he's just an overall wide receiver monster that has had worse quarterback play and done very well. So there's obviously some bigger potential here as well. I think with what they've added in. Let's kind of look at the running back position here for Chicago because I want to get your thoughts on it
Mm-hmm.
because I have some of my own and I don't think they're going to be very popular. But I think that the player that I would actually be out on drafting from Chicago is going to be running back Khalil Herbert. And if you draft him, I'm not going to say he's going to kill your team, but I don't think you're drafting him at what is. I think you're drafting him at what his ceiling, not his floor. Currently, he's
Mm-hmm.
running back 36. He goes off the board in the mid ninth round. So he's obviously not a high pick, but I could also see him being the biggest jumper come August when most seasonal leagues are drafting. When we see more news coming out with training camp, with all of this. So I think his value shoots up because of that. And so because of that, I think I want to avoid this because I think this is one of those ambiguous was it? It's not a known backfield. It's an yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling with my words, but that's okay.
No, no, you're good. You're good. Mm-hmm.
Thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
that
think
because I think
to kind of elaborate. Mhm.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I do have a couple of thoughts. I would say I agree with you. With the backfield having so many people, there's two things, right? So we're shifting away. We talked about this last week. We're shifting away from this lead back bell cow mentality with a lot of teams. You're going to see less and less of these RB1s. And we'll probably discuss in a future episode of like an RB0 strategy with drafting your fantasy team. But you see this in Chicago where they have three viable running backs, a rookie, and then two running backs who've had experience with other teams. And so you have that combined with a very active running quarterback. So
Yep.
for fantasy wise, you have no idea what to turn with. Like in the real football side of things, is Fields is going to handle the good, clean first looks. These guys are going to come in to give him a break. Hey, I need you to run. I need you to HB dive. Try to get 3 or 4 yards. Make it a 2nd and 6 for him, so we have some options on a read option or something like that. Right? That's the real football side of it. For fantasy wise, I agree with you. I don't think any of these picks are going to really break your team, break your draft. You have them, but I mean, you're kind of taking these. They're almost like flyers at this point. Like
Yep.
it's really you hold on to them and hope something pans out, and you shouldn't be banking on these guys as part of like your RB1, RB2s on your team.
Yeah. And so, and this is going to lead to the player that I would actually draft higher at his ADP. But to finish out, also,
Mm-hmm.
Last season, Khalil Herbert couldn't stave off. He couldn't stave off the running back they got rid of, David Montgomery. He could not keep Montgomery off the field. Now, I don't know if that was a
Mm-hmm.
coaching decision or if that was just a pure talent. He couldn't do it. When he played, when Montgomery was hurt, yes, Herbert had games where he was good. I'm not going to say he wasn't good, but because he couldn't keep Herbert off, we have now, and I remember the word, it's ambiguous backfield with three backs that could literally take over the starting role. I don't want to take the most expensive
Mm-hmm.
guy in my draft, especially if
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
No.
he's going to pay off as far as I want upside. When I'm drafting that late, I want upside. So with that thinking, it doesn't mean that, Herbert doesn't have value, but especially if we start seeing his value shoot up over, the course of July and August as we're getting ready to draft, I don't want to get so stuck on a player that I say, well, I have to draft this player. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
rather go out and take the rookie because they did draft Roshan Johnson. And I'm of the opinion that we don't know what Roshan is yet. He was the backup for one of the greatest running back talents we've seen since Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson at Texas. So he didn't get a full workload in college. We don't know fully what he's capable of. Would he have been a first round pick or a second round pick had he not backed up Bijan Robinson in college? We don't know, but I don't think he's bad. And so currently, Roshan goes off at the end of the 13th round at the 13-11 pick. He's running back 52. I'll take the later double digit running back and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, if it doesn't work out, he's waiver wire fodder at that point, and then we'll move on from
Mm-hmm.
there. But if he does work out, you then probably have a running back too that you got in the 13th round. So that's where I'll
Mm-hmm.
take the upside of potential versus the known commodity where I think I have just this floor of what I'm going to get.
Yeah, I agree with you. I and also too that kind of also plays into this RB0 strategy that's been very popular in
Right.
fantasy last few years. Is exactly what your thought is like, hey, I'm paying high capital for proven assets that, especially in half point PPR, full point PPR, are getting you points more consistently. And with running backs like this, high upside, but I'm not spending a lot of high value draft picks to get these guys. Makes sense to me, and I think I like that play. I like Roshan. Reminds me a lot of how Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders were at Oklahoma State, where
Mm,
Thurman Thomas was the lead back, Barry Sanders was on the bench. Barry Sanders, arguably the greatest running back of all time, definitely top three. Then comes off the bench in college and plays 2 years and has one of the best running back seasons in all of college sports, right? So there's a
right.
lot of parallels with that. Not saying that Roshan Johnson is the next Barry Sanders, but
Right.
I did, being an Oklahoma State fan, I did watch him play last couple years. Watched him play some, and he had the talent. He had the size. So I like him a lot, and I think what you said, pick 13, 14, that's better than a lot of flyers you're going to be taking elsewhere. So I do like that
Yeah.
pick.
Yep. At that point in time, especially, I like to shoot for my upside. What's my upside? What are the guys that, if it's
Mm-hmm.
not a league winner, it's, I get, a really good upside with what I can get. So, all right. Speaking of upside, well, I don't know how much upside this team has. So I hope they have a lot more than what people say they do. But again, I think the theme of the NFC North is what are people saying? And should we be pivoting off of what's the consensus here? So I think this is a good team to really take a good look at and say, okay, should we pivot off them? So it's the Green Bay Packers.
Mm-hmm.
They finished third in the division last year. So a lot of people are saying they're going to have another down year, mainly because of who they lost this year in free agency. And we all know Aaron Rodgers is now no longer the quarterback there. And
Mm-hmm.
he also, when he went to the Jets, he took best friends Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb with him. So they're also with the Jets. But also, Green Bay lost tight end Robert Tonyan, which we just spoke about going to the Bears, and then tight end Mercedes Lewis. So they lost a lot in free agency. They didn't really acquire anybody in free agency that we want to speak of. It's not fantasy relevant. The only ones really I'll actually talk about is they drafted wide receiver Jaden Reed in round 2. Also in round 2, drafted tight end Luke Musgrave. And then later in round 3, Tucker Kraft at tight end as well. So it appears that Green Bay is trying to load up on young talent. Last year, we all know they took Christian Watson and then Romeo Doubs as well. So they still also have Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon in the backfield. But they're now looking to quarterback Jordan Love to lead them. So, initial thoughts on the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, so initial thoughts, fantasy-wise, man, it's tough pickings to go with Packers fans. I mean, this reminds me a lot of, picking one of the Jets players 3 or 4 years ago, right? Where it's just like almost a fantasy wasteland. And what's crazy is, you have 2 or 3 years ago, multiple players are some of the hottest prospects in fantasy. And now this year, you have Aaron Jones that is now splitting workload like he always does. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, the Packers, both real football wise and fantasy, I don't see a lot of production. I see a lot of low scoring games. Again, it's hard to know, but at least with some of these second year quarterbacks, you've seen what they've brought to the table their first year and how they can improve. But with Jordan Love, we've seen very sporadically, we've seen some preseason stuff. We've seen some games where Aaron Rodgers has not been able to play. But overall, we haven't seen a body of work where he's had the mentality of the number one quarterback going into the game, right? Where he's like, I'm leading this team, I'm starting this, and so, it's just one of those things. Like I think fantasy wise, like I don't know if I'm down on all the players. I think you can pick up. I think you can pick up Aaron Jones, for example, on at a deal based upon his ADP, but yeah,
Yep.
I agree with you.
His ADP is currently. Oh, let me pull that up because I think a lot of the ADP
I think he's in the fourth round, right?
Yeah, he's currently in the middle, 4th round, 4-5. He's running back 16.
Yeah.
So I do think a lot of the ADP,
I mean,
it's being pushed down. People think currently of this is not going to be the team we want to target. There's going to be some risk with drafting Packers players.
Exactly. And I think with Aaron Jones, I mean, he's, if I had to guess, going to get a larger workload at least in the first 3 or 4 games while Jordan Love's getting used to the offense and running it. So I could definitely see, and my thoughts are if everyone's afraid of the Packers, right, which is the consensus right now, is even if Aaron Jones comes to you in like late third, early fourth, maybe even the fifth if he falls, people are scared. That's a great value, I think, because there's not a whole lot of running backs in this league anymore that are going to share a large workload, and I think they're going to rely on Aaron Jones quite a bit in these first few weeks.
Yeah, and I think especially depending on the news that comes out, and this is something that most fantasy football players know, but I think we still get caught up in this, especially when it comes to draft season, is not just buying into every off-season news piece that we see. So Aaron Jones could either rise very rapidly because, oh, look what he's doing. He's catching a lot of balls, or he's, got a lot of work. But real football wise, I mean, he could be that safety valve for Jordan Love this year where, you're talking about, Leonard Fournette last year with Tom Brady. Now, I'm not going to compare Tom Brady to Jordan Love. That's not the case, but quarterbacks that have a safety valve typically will either use a tight end or a running back. And Fournette last year got 73 balls from Tom Brady last year. So in the realm of possibilities, in the spectrum of what could happen, you could see a 50-catch season from Aaron Jones. He is more the pass catcher in this back. So, yeah, especially at the 4th round, if you're going with the zero RB or, hero RB where you're taking one guy, but you're really loading up on wide receivers, Aaron Jones later on as that, hey, let's see what happens here, especially if he drops. I think that's really good value. On Jordan Love, I'll make one kind of comment on that where he was in the 2020 draft and yeah, he was drafted by Green Bay in that draft as kind of the backup to Rodgers. And in that draft, in the 2020 draft, you know who all was in that draft? There are a few kind of key names that came in that draft as well.
2020 draft. Might have to refresh me on that.
So in the 2020 draft, we had guys like Tua Tagovailoa coming in that draft. There was Justin Herbert in that draft. Joe Burrow was also in that draft. This was a
This was all
highly
2019. Oh,
regarded.
wow.
Yeah, this was a highly regarded quarterback draft in 2020. The one thing I will say for Jordan Love is during the Senior Bowl that year, he had one of the biggest arms by ability to throw deep. So he had that ability where he could just unleash it deep. He had probably one of the best arms, and he's going up against those guys. He had a bigger arm than, at least at that point in time, Herbert or Tua. I think it was Herbert that actually was at the Senior Bowl with him, and Love was compared a lot better as far as his deep ball throws. So this is not me saying Jordan Love is better than Justin Herbert. That's not what I'm saying at all. So don't read into that too much. What I'm saying is he actually, I think, has some. This is, like you said, the first opportunity we see him be that lead quarterback. Where another guy that we're gonna have on, as a big question mark, mainly because of how he finished last year, is wide receiver Christian Watson, where he made, during the last half of the year, he just went nuts in the scoring column where he was scoring touchdowns weekly, and it was just an unreal pace that I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to think that that's going to extrapolate over a full season, where that's not sustainable. But depending on, price, you're probably going to have, in home leagues or in, some drafts, you're probably going to have that one Packer fan that really believes that Christian Watson is the next Randy Moss, the next whatever. He's going to take that leap. So outside of those drafts where you have the guy taking him in like the second round, currently Christian Watson's going in the middle of the fifth round. He's wide receiver 24. He's going around guys like Jerry Jeudy, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, which we just mentioned, Mike Williams. So that's the realm he's going in. And if he really is that deep threat and he's the number one wide receiver and he has that ability to take that next step, that could be a value. Where I get concerned is, and where I may be out and avoiding him, is if that's the guy that's going to make the highlight reels come training camp time, come all of this, where he's going to jump to the third round. And we've seen it when a wide receiver jumps from, 2-3 rounds over an offseason, that's a bit inflated, and that's the biggest tell. Michael Pittman last year was the biggest one because he was a fifth-round pick as well, early June or late June, early July. Come August, he's a second-round pick, and he should not have been. So he could be taking that leap where that's where I'll be out on him. Not because I don't like the talent. I don't like where his ADP could be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think recency bias is big. A lot of people, I say most players in most leagues, you remember the last few games this season. You remember, like I said, Christian Watson scored all those touchdowns, had an unreal pace for the last few games, thinking, man, if he had played like this all year, he would have, rivaled Jefferson and other players for the most points and fantasy, wide receiver one, blah, 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 right? All this stuff. And so
right.
I think a lot of people, most people take a break from football for a few months. You're not really thinking about it from late February until about early August. And so you have a chunk there where you kind of forget things. And I do agree with you. You brought up a very good point. You see that gap, that large gap, and that jump, and you have to understand like there's probably a space in between, right? Where yes, his value has increased, is probably not increased as much as current ADP is showing. And I'm guessing, if I had to guess, I'm thinking it probably slips a little bit before August, just because things will kind of settle. People will kind of start getting back into the rhythm of things, doing some mock drafts. And I think with Jordan Love and other factors involved, I think it's going to settle a little bit. But yeah, I agree with you. I think at probably at current ADP, like I said, fifth round pick, probably not doing that, but sixth or seventh, probably, right? If he falls me in the seventh round, I'm probably going to take him. But yeah, fifth
Sure.
round's a little aggressive in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think there's a player that we could ever say I'm out on him. I may be out on the ADP that a player's going, but that doesn't mean I don't like the player. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something I think that's something that's not talked about enough. Is I can say I like a player, but I'm not going to draft him, and that could be for
Mm-hmm.
a season
Exactly.
where I may like a player, but I just for this season may not draft him. So, all right,
Mm-hmm.
next up is one of the hottest teams this offseason for the NFC North, and that is the current favorite to win the division, the Detroit Lions. Now, Detroit
Mm.
will look a little different this year. They lost, for fantasy notable players, they lost running back DeAndre Swift, wide receiver DJ Chark, and running back Jamal Williams. However, they did replace those players with running back David Montgomery from the Bears. Wide receiver Marvin Jones
Mm.
Jr. gets a reunion because he was with Detroit before. And notable in the draft, they drafted in round one Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama. They also, in round two, drafted tight end Sam Laporta. And if we're really, kind of wanting to see potential, this is more dynasty related, is it's round three, they drafted Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee as a quarterback who we all think will probably be the backup to Jared Goff. So that's not a this year thought as far as playtime, but it's kind of interesting to note who's going to be potentially under center in years to come. Detroit did a lot from what I see in the offseason to bolster their secondary. So on the defense side, that's not really relevant fantasy wise. The biggest thing in the offseason, now this is where I wanted to make sure I was clear with. I was on the Lions last year because I did not particularly like how the Lions drafted, at least the round one. Um, I understand wanting to get your guy, but I
Mm-hmm.
thought round one, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alabama, that was a bit of a reach for a running back position. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they were. I think the Lions were really making efforts to bolster, like you said, bolster their offense, really cement themselves as being leaders for the division. I think they smelled the blood in the water. They knew, okay, Aaron Rodgers is gone. He's no longer going to be this massive thorn in our side. They're looking at Chicago, right? They're looking at the Vikings. Like, the Lions are like, no pun intended, like licking their lips, so to speak, right? Like, they're like, look at this whole division, like, man, like, we have the potential to really make some moves. I agree with you. I think they reached a little bit on Gibbs, especially when they let Swift go. I mean, I think, to me, I think what they want to do is they were just trying to like basically reshore the asset that they lost in Swift, and basically just like, you know, go back to like, okay, hey, we want to go back to this kind of higher tier quality running back that we lost and lost another team. So I think, to me, I do think they overpaid a little bit. I also think like the front office was very concerned with like keeping as much of the team together as possible while adding new weapons and like helping the defense out. So again, I do think, I think they were reached. I honestly didn't look at a lot of Gibbs. I didn't look at him play a lot in college, so I don't really know. how he shaped up. I need to go back and look at some highlights and things like that. But that's probably
Yeah.
going to be a really hot pick. But I'll let you. Maybe you watch some of his stuff. I didn't watch a lot of his film.
Yeah, so I've seen a little bit of his film. He's more of a pass catching back, and he is very athletic. Where don't get me wrong, he's a very talented, very athletic running back. He is a little bit on the smaller side. I think he's comes in about between like 190, 200. Maybe he's a little bit over 200. I could be wrong. But he is very fast. He's good at catching the ball. So I think that's where we fall in love as fantasy players with the potential of, especially in
Mm-hmm.
PPR leagues, of what's that pass catching role. Now, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. They had not actually made the trade. It was I think the day after or 2 days after, it might have been, that Detroit made the trade with Philadelphia that sent DeAndre Swift away. So by drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, that foretold everybody what was going to happen, where we were left wondering for
Mm-hmm.
about a day of what does this mean for DeAndre Swift? Well, DeAndre Swift was never a favorite of the coaching staff. So I think with the signaling that we're getting from Detroit is Jahmyr Gibbs is their guy by reaching for him in the first round. It's not a smart pick from a real football sense, in my opinion. It's a fun pick for sure. Absolutely. Um, this is also where I'm out at current ADB on Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't see the potential that he could be a potential top 7, top 5 running back for fantasy this year. I think for him to get there, though, we're not factoring in a few other things. I think there has to be some other factors that happen for him to reach that. I don't see him, having
Mm-hmm.
that 50 catch season as a rookie this year with that offense because they still have Amon-Ra St. Brown. The Sun God is still there. David Montgomery is a capable pass catcher more than Jamal Williams was last year. So I feel like if we're considering David Montgomery to be the straight replacement of Jamal Williams, I think we're underselling him. Yes, Jamison Williams, it has a 6-game suspension, but once he comes back, you have him as well. Marvin Jones Jr. is back there. He knows that system, that team very well. And then also rookie tight end Sam LaPorta is a very good pass catching tight end. So
Mm-hmm.
I think in the construct of this offense, when you're taking, Gibbs currently goes off the board at running back 18. He's in the middle of 4th round as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather take my chances on another running back. I'd also said I'll take David Montgomery 3 rounds later
Mm-hmm.
in the 7th round to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, he may not catch as many passes, but he's going to see a lot more of the rush share, which means he's going to be put on the field a lot more and have a potential bigger
Mm-hmm.
role in the offense because of that. So that's where I kind of see
Exactly.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. Also, just for a gut check, right? We're if let's say
Yep.
hypothetically, like, you listen to this, you're like, man, Gibbs, like, you guys are crazy. I think he's going too high. Think about the team we just talked about. Aaron Jones, we all know the fantasy value of Aaron Jones, is going at pick 4.4. So keep that
Yep.
in mind. So right now, with ADP and a rookie who has yet to play in a game on a team that is good and has a lot of different players, is now being compared with Aaron Jones, who has quite a bit of experience
Yep.
in real
We've
football
seen
and
it
also
with
with
him.
fantasy production.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So that's having a gut check. I was like, wow, okay. Is he being overvalued? Maybe. Is Aaron Jones undervalued? Maybe a little bit both. Right? There's a
Right.
combination, that sweet spot where the ADP's picking up on both of them. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Gibbs is a little bit overvalued probably, but time will tell. But I agree. It's going to be interesting to kind of see where it kind of shakes out in August. Like I said, maybe falls to the 5th round, but he is definitely high.
I mean, we could see, and especially, they start the season in Kansas City. So that could be fireworks all over the place with that game as a season opener. So if Gibbs comes out first game and he catches 8 passes for 60 yards and has a touchdown, everybody that drafted Gibbs in the fourth, even if he jumps to the third round, is going to look at everybody in the league and say, ha, see what I got here? When that's one game in. We don't, that's the worst thing to do, victory lap one game in. So I could see his value dip down, where he's not going to average 8 to 10 catches, especially once this team is fully on the field. So question, with the suspension to Jameson Williams, knowing he's out for 6 games, are you even considering drafting him in the offseason?
No, you're good. That's a great question. I don't really know, honestly. That's kind of I mean, I'd like to know your feedback, because something I'm not really sure about, honestly.
So he's currently going in the 10th round. He is going around, Zay Flowers, Alan Lazard, Odell Beckham, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Thomas. So he's definitely, going around those players where you're not super excited about them, right? To me, if I'm taking him, he better be my 4th or 5th wide receiver that I'm taking off the board. That's kind of where I'm looking at. If I'm going to take him and hold him, I'm going to do that, and just know he's going to potentially, hold off. I don't particularly like drafting players that I can't start instantly. I also know it's a risk of he has that upside. Like, I know he has that upside of playmaking ability where had he not been coming off the ACL injury, this could have been his real big breakout year where, we didn't see that because of that injury last year. So to me, I think it kind of depends on his ADP. In the 10th round, I think it's probably okay. If he goes up, I'm probably going to be out and just say, you know what, if he beats me, then he beats me. That's fine. So.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Jeff, I apologize, but I have to step off for a little bit. So
you're
sorry
good.
To finish the episode with the Vikings, but
that's all right. Yeah, I'll finish up here with the Vikings. So I appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. And apologies for having to get off, but thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and excited to talk again next week.
That's right. We'll see you later, Grant. All right, bye. So we're going to finish up here with the Minnesota Vikings. And real quick, and again, this is a division of who's taking an ownership of it. Who's that? What's that team like? Who is there? What are people saying? What are people seeing, right? So with the Minnesota Vikings, we're going to go real fast, where they lost Dalvin Cook, Irv Smith Jr., and Adam Thielen. And they only acquired tight end Josh Oliver, but they had already traded last year for TJ Hawkinson. The main splash in draft was round 1, they took Jordan Addison, and then round 7, they took Dwayne McBride. So we all know that the Vikings are the biggest regression candidate for this season. That was already something that we had discussed real quick. But the biggest question, I think, for them is Madison the guy to replace Dalvin Cook? If you go to any fantasy football analyst, it's kind of split whether they think he is or not. Dalvin Cook had over 1,100 yards last year and 10 touchdowns. Madison couldn't get him off the field, so I'm not sold on Madison. And I think as we get into July, August, into these rookie drafts, we're going to start seeing more and more people that like it because it's the name. Madison has been that waiver wire darling that we love, right? He's been that guy where he's produced well on a week to week, kind of basis. But and currently his ADP is not awful. It's in the 6th round. He is RB 26. He is actually rising since even when I was looking at this a few weeks ago. So he's on the rise. I can see him rising even more. And that's where my concern is. Currently, he's taking around the guys like Rashad White, David Montgomery, James Conner, Cam Akers, Javonte Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, other running backs that are either in a 1A or 1B on their team and also in really good situations. So I'm not sold on Madison. I don't think he's going to be the guy this year. And that's where I think we have to really take note of what are we being told? Are we being told by things that we read that everybody just, I'm in on Madison because, well, they don't have Dalvin Cook. They didn't bring anybody else in, which they did by draft. And then Ty Chandler is also there from last year. So they have a depth in running back room. Because I feel like he's going to be the name that is very popular. He's going to be the guy that I'm out on. But I will be in on his counterparts in Ty Chandler and DeWayne McBride, where basically you can take them at the end of the draft. You don't actually have to draft them at all. So I will take the chance on those if I'm trying to fill a roster spot. But I will hold off on Madison, where I'll take a guy where I know what his value is in like Montgomery, or even like Cam Akers, Rashad White, where there is some upside, I feel like. And those players will get to in other ones that we didn't talk about. We will get to in other shows, but I appreciate all of you for listening. Again, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube page that you get notified when we upload videos. Feel free to leave your comments, feedback, and we will see you all next week. We will start breaking down another division, and we will wish Grant best of luck. I know he had family things going on, so he had to jump off real fast. So, but wish him all the best as well, and he will be back to co-host with me next week. So until then, appreciate all of you, and may you have a great weekend.